Welcome to Fostering Resilience. I'm KJ Foster, and welcome to the 4th edition of Spiritual Sunday. Spiritual Sunday is a day where I make a book recommendation that you can utilize in your spiritual practice or in your toothbrush therapy practice, if that's something that you're engaging in. Toothbrush therapy being 5 things that you do every single day in order to help you to stay clean and sober and build that mental and emotional strength that is so critical and necessary in order to successfully and fully recover from any type of substance use disorder. But of course, as I tell you every single week, I think that it's also a great practice for family members, for friends, for anyone really who is seeking to get stronger mentally, emotionally, and physically, because it all is connected. It's all tied together. So this book in particular that I'm presenting to you today was a total game changer for me. This is a book that I was exposed to when I was about 6 months sober. So I'm approaching 13 years actually it'll be Tuesday. This video will launch Sunday, which is I think the 18th, and Tuesday is the 20th. That's my anniversary date. I'll be 13 years sober. But when I was way back, feels like a lifetime ago, and it actually was a lifetime ago, I was about 6 months sober, and it was one of those, I really consider this in and of itself kind of like a spiritual experience, because I don't know where this book came from, but I was just bored, one afternoon, I think it was a Sunday, and I was, in my own head, and just the committee was going and thinking about all these things from the past and worrying about the future and how to pay the bills and lots of stuff going on at that time in my life. And lots of stress, lots of anxiety, lots of panic attacks during that time. And so I wanted to distract myself, get myself out of my thinking. So I went to my bookshelf. I've always been an avid reader from the time I was little. I'll give you a little quick story. When I was little, I often got grounded. I often got grounded to my room because I got in so much trouble when I was growing up that I was constantly grounded. And back then, there were no TVs, like iPhones, computers, like nothing like that. So I had my books and I would read Nancy Drew mysteries. And ever since that time, it's like, to me, that's an example of how good has come out of a negative, unfortunate experience, because it wasn't fun getting grounded over and over again. But I did become a really good reader and an avid reader for my entire life as a result of that. So I've always had a ton of books, and which is why it brings me here to you today, is presenting you with a book. So I have many bookshelves. You can maybe see in the back here, I have 2 bookshelves. If you go into our garage, we have like 10 bookshelves, not to mention our outside office. So I have lots of books that I'm going to be able to present to you. And this one, it was like one of those moments where I thought to myself, let me go grab a book and read something. And I went to my bookshelf and I pulled out this book, and I really don't even know who gave it to me, where it came from, but it totally was, in my opinion, a godsend. And it was this book, and you're like, okay, KJ, what book is that? Well, I'm going to put a picture of the book on the screen because my book is so worn. Like, I've read this book. If you look in the book, it's underlined and outlined, like all through the book, because I've read this book so many times. But the first time I picked it up, back when I was 6 months sober, and I opened it up and started reading it, it was really profound to me, and it made a huge difference in my recovery process. And it was where I believe my awakening started, where I went from being what some people refer to as asleep or unconscious to starting to become fully conscious. And you'll understand why when I tell you what the book is and I read a little bit out of it to you, which is a part of what I do. So the book is called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And it is phenomenal. And usually if you're somebody who's been watching my Spiritual Sundays, welcome back. You know that, and if you're not, welcome, glad to have you here. But you know that I usually read from the back cover, but clearly there's There's no back cover. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning, at how it describes the book in the beginning, and then I'm going to go to a particular section where I'll read like 3 more pages, because that's what the practice is. You read at least 4 pages and then just share a little bit about it with you. So we start with, this book, I promise you, if you get this book and you read this book, it's really going to, I think, make a profound difference in your life, because it has in mine. All right, so I'm just going to read a little bit from the publisher's preface, which is by Mark Allen. And he says here, from the first page of his writing, it is clear that Eckhart Tolle is a contemporary master. He is not aligned with any particular religion or doctrine or guru. His teaching embraces the heart, the essence of all other traditions, and contradicts none of them: Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, indigenous, or anything else. He's able to do what all the great masters have done, to show us in simple and clear language that the way, the truth, and the light is within us. Over and over, Eckhart Tolle shows us how to connect with what he calls our being. Being is the eternal, ever-present one life beyond the myriad forms of life that are subject to birth and death. However, being is not only beyond, but also deep within every form as its innermost, invisible, and indestructible essence. This means that it's accessible to you now as your own deepest self, your true nature. But don't seek to grasp it with your mind. Don't try to understand it. You can know it only when the mind is still. When you are present fully and intensely in the now, to regain awareness of being and to abide in that state of feeling realization is enlightenment. The power of now is nearly impossible to read straight through. It requires you to put it down periodically and reflect on the words and apply them to your own life experience. It is a complete guide, a complete course in meditation and realization. It is a book to be revisited again and again. And each time you revisit it, you gain new depth and meaning. It's a book that many people, including me, will want to study for a lifetime. It is a book with the power to change lives, the power to awaken us to fully realize who we are. And that has absolutely been the truth for me as someone who very early on, when I first began my recovery journey. And when I say that, I mean my recovery journey this last time, like this period of 13 years, when I began this recovery journey, because I began a recovery journey over and over and over again. I began and then I stopped, and I started and stopped and started and stopped. I relapsed. I struggled and tried to stay stopped for a period of 5 years where I just couldn't seem to get it, so to speak, right? And I really think that this book was my launching pad, so to speak, in terms of starting to begin to get in touch with who I really am, and to tap into those qualities and that awareness of self started to calm down my thinking. I stopped having anxiety attacks, and I started to be able to sit with those uncomfortable thoughts and those uncomfortable emotions and recognize them for what they truly are. And so before I share anything else, I'm going to read 3 pages to you from a section that was the pivotal turning point for me. It was the section that I read where I took heed of Eckhart's advice in this book and started to monitor my thinking for 24 hours and had one of those epiphanies, one of those like aha experiences, and recognized that I was the cause of my own suffering. I was the one that was continuing to allow, it was the programming, the conditioning of my mind that oftentimes were totally unaware. That so the whole idea of like, we're asleep, we're unconscious, we're living life asleep, so to speak, and not with any conscious awareness, is because our minds become conditioned over time. And it's just we when we're not aware of it, when we're not conscious of it, when we don't take that awareness, that conscious effort to become aware and learn how you can actually manage the mind, then we're just operating on autopilot. We're just responding to this conditioning within the mind. So hopefully you'll understand that a little bit better after I read these 3 pages to you. So this is from the section that's on page 14 called Freeing Yourself from Your Mind. And isn't this what we really need to do when we're recovering from addiction? Is just think about that, how wonderful that would feel, right? To be able to free yourself from your mind. Well, it's possible. So freeing yourself from your mind, what exactly do you mean by watching the thinker? So throughout this book, Eckhart responds to these common questions that he's often asked. And so one of those is, what exactly do you mean by watching the thinker? When someone goes to the doctor and says, I hear a voice in my head, he or she will most likely be sent to a psychiatrist. The fact is that in a very similar way, virtually everyone hears a voice or several voices in their head all the time. The involuntary thought processes that you don't realize you have the power to stop. And that's an important part there. The involuntary thought processes that you don't realize that you have the power to stop. Continuous monologues or dialogues. You've probably come across mad people in the street incessantly talking or muttering to themselves. Well, that's not much different from what you and all other normal people do, except that you don't do it out loud. The voice comments, speculates, judges, compares, complains, likes, dislikes, and so on. The voice isn't necessarily relevant to the situation you find yourself in at the time. It may be reviving the recent or distant past, or rehearsing or imagining possible future situations. I don't know about you, but I've done that a lot of times. It often imagines things going wrong and negative outcomes. This is called worry. Sometimes this soundtrack is accompanied by visual images or mental movies. Even if the voice is relevant to the situation at hand, it will interpret it in terms of the past. This is because the voice belongs to your conditioned mind, which is the result of all your past history, as well as of the collective culture mindset you inherited. So you see and judge the present through the eyes of the past and get a totally distorted view of it. It's not uncommon for the voice to be a person's own worst enemy. Many people live with a tormentor in their head that continuously attacks and punishes them and drains them of vital energy. It is the cause of untold misery and unhappiness, as well as of disease. The good news is that you can free yourself from your mind. This is the only true liberation. You can take the first step right now. Start listening to the voice in your head. And I have this all like underlined in here. I have this whole section underlined. You can take the first step right now. Start listening to the voice in your head as often as you can. Pay particular attention to any repetitive thought patterns, those old gramophone recordings that have been playing in your head perhaps for many years. This is what I mean by watching the thinker. You're becoming that third-party observer of yourself and your own thinking, which is another way of saying listen to the voice in your head, be there as the witnessing presence. When you listen to that voice, listen to it impartially. That is to say, do not judge. Do not judge or condemn what you hear, for doing so would mean that the same voice has come in again through the back door. You'll soon realize there is the voice, and here I am listening to it, watching it. This I am realization, this sense of your own presence, is not a thought. It arises from beyond the mind. So when you listen to a thought, you are aware not only of the thought, but also of yourself as the witness of the thought. A new dimension of consciousness has come in. As you listen to the thought, you feel a conscious presence. Your deeper self, behind or underneath the thought, as it were. The thought then loses its power over you and quickly subsides because you're no longer energizing the mind through identification with it. This is the beginning of the end of involuntary and compulsive thinking. When a thought subsides, you experience a discontinuity in the mental stream, a gap of what he quotes as no mind. At first, the gaps will be short, a few seconds perhaps, but gradually they will become longer. And when these gaps occur, you feel a certain stillness and peace inside of you. This is the beginning of your natural state of felt oneness with being, which is usually obscured by the mind. With practice, this sense of stillness and peace will deepen. In fact, there's no end to its depth. You will also feel a subtle emanation of joy arising from deep within, the joy of being. It's not a trance-like state, not at all. There's no loss of consciousness here. The opposite is the case. If the price of peace were a lowering of your consciousness and the price of stillness a lack of vitality and alertness, then they would not be worth having. In this state of inner connectedness, you are much more alert, more awake than in the mind-identified state. You are fully present. It also raises the vibrational frequency of the energy field that gives life to the physical body. So you're also not only are you gaining that mental awareness and that also the awareness of how the mind is connected to the emotions, but also you're strengthening your physical state of being. So as you go more deeply into this realm of no mind, as it is sometimes called in the East, you realize the state of pure consciousness. In that state, you feel your own presence with such intensity and such joy that all thinking, all emotions, your physical body, as well as the whole external world, become relatively insignificant in comparison to it. And yet, this is not a selfish, but a selfless state. It takes you beyond what you previously thought of as yourself, in quotes. That presence is essentially you and at the same time inconceivably greater than you. What I am trying to convey here may sound paradoxical or even contradictory, but there's no other way that I can express it. Instead of watching the thinker, you can also create a gap in the mind stream simply by directing the focus of your attention into the now. Just become intensely conscious of the present moment. This is a deeply satisfying thing to do. In this way, you draw consciousness away from mind activity and you create a gap of no mind in which you are highly alert and aware but not thinking. This is the essence of meditation. In your everyday life, you can practice this by taking any routine activity that normally is only a means to an end and giving it your fullest attention so that it becomes an end in and of itself. For example, every time you walk up and down the stairs in your house or place of work, pay close attention to every step, every movement, even your breathing. Be totally present. Or when you wash your hands, pay attention to all the sense perceptions associated with the activity, the sound and feel of the water, the movement of your hands, the scent of the soap, and so on. Or when you get into your car, after you close the door, pause for a few seconds and observe the flow of your breath. Become aware of a silent but powerful sense of presence. This is one certain criterion by which you can measure your success in this practice, the degree of peace that you feel within. And then this is the last part here. So the single most vital step on your journey toward enlightenment is this. Learn to disidentify from your mind. Every time you create a gap in the stream of the mind, the light of your consciousness grows stronger. So this truly, like I said, was just profound to me. I know I say that all the time, but it really, really was. It was a moment of realization that, and it wasn't really as I was reading the book. Okay, so as I'm reading the book, I'm starting to gain this awareness of just how much my thinking is influencing how I'm feeling, how I respond, what I do. But I took his advice in that I started to become aware of what was going on in my mind. He goes on to talk about like how many thoughts we have a day, and that so much of our thinking is, when we really pay attention to what we're thinking about, is so predominantly negative more than positive. And so I know I gave you, if you were here last week, that assignment of just noticing, right? Just being aware without judging, noticing how much you negatively speak about yourself or speak about others, like what's going on in your mind. How do you speak? How do you use your word, towards others and towards yourself? But this now goes beyond that in terms of really having an awareness of how that then is influencing, right? Everything else, how it's influencing how I'm feeling and what I'm doing. So this is what I did. As a result of reading this whole first section back when I was, 6 months sober, I decided that I was going to practice this, and I started, that evening. It was later in the day, and I went to bed that night. I woke up in the morning, and it talks about being aware of when you wake up in the morning, like what's in your mind, what are you thinking about? And I just started to pay attention and to notice. And what I noticed was that by the time I had gotten out of the shower and was getting ready for work, I was almost in a full-blown panic attack. And I was almost in a full-blown panic attack simply based upon the thoughts that were going on in my mind. That it was all this, things I was going through a really difficult divorce at the time. And so I'm playing out things in my head, like I'm going to say this and this person's going to say that. I'm like working it all out in my mind, and I'm getting myself all worked up simply based upon what I'm thinking in my head. So I started to practice redirecting. Like when I noticed that my thoughts were going to this, when the tapes were starting to play and I was going to this really negative place, I started using mantras to shift out of those negative thought patterns, because so much of it was conditioning. It was like just this conditioned thought process. And when I did that, wow, things really started to change. When I started practicing in the moment of feeling stressed, feeling worried, thinking about the past, worrying about the future, stopping for a moment and saying to myself, okay, KJ, where are your feet right now? And looking down at my feet and grounding myself into the present moment. And then thinking, okay, what really needs to be done right now in this moment? Like, where am I going? What am I doing? And just being able to sit for a moment and then redirect my thinking. And it takes a lot of practice. I'm still practicing 13 years later, but I'm so much better at it. And I have experienced more often than not those moments of peace, contentment. And to me, that makes everything that I've been through my active addiction and this recovery process so sweet. Like it's so amazing to me that through this darkest time of my life, I've gotten to a point where I'm able to now experience more peace and contentment than I've ever had before in my entire life. And a lot of it is due to this man and his book, Eckhart Tolle. Thank you so much. And this Power of Now, which is truly transformational. So I hope you take advantage of utilizing this for your spiritual practice or for your toothbrush therapy. And let me know in the comments, have you heard of this book? Have you read this book? What has been your experience with this book? And also, if you did the exercise from last week, what your experience was from doing that exercise. And if you haven't watched the video from last week, you can go ahead and hop on over to the playlist and you can watch all of the past Spiritual Sundays. And so thank you so much for being here today. If you enjoyed this video, if you could give it a like and share it with others who may benefit. And definitely, if you haven't subscribed yet, click on the red subscribe button. And I hope you'll join me back here again next week for the next edition of Spiritual Sunday. In the meantime, have a very beautiful and a blessed day. Namaste.